Joining us in the studio to carry on these discussions are a former Vice-chancellor of the University of Abuja and the Sokoto State University, my own former Vice-chancellor, Professor Nuhu Yaqub. Welcome, sir.
Thank you so very much.
It's excellent to have you with us.
Thank you.
All right. Also, our next guest is a seasoned diplomat, a technocrat, and was a former Deputy Permanent Secretary of the Federal Republic of Nigeria to the United Nations and Directing Staff, National Institute of Policy and Strategy Studies, Ambassador USMAN SARKI. It's good to have you, sir.
Thank you.
A pleasure. I was watching your interview the other day from the Biden elections, and I was like, oh, this is going to be intimidating. All right. Also joining us is a former Director, Democratic Studies, National Institute for Legislative and Democratic Studies, National Assembly, Abuja, Professor Femi Ajayi. He's joining us online from Atlanta, Georgia. Good to have you on the show, sir.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
All right, sir. So I'm going to start with you, Ambassador. What could realistically have been done to stop Russia from invading Crimea and this whole situation that we have? Realistically, people talk about a lot of issues, but realistically, as an ambassador, what could have been done?
That in December, President Putin, Vladimir Putin of Russia, sent a diplomatic note to his counterpart, President Biden of the United States. And in that note, basically, we can summarize that what was raised was certain concerns of Russia with regards to the expansion of NATO and the EU eastwards to specifically Ukraine.
Yes.
And there, the Russian president informed his American counterpart and through him to the rest of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization membership that this is a no-go area.
Yeah.
It's a red line. We will not allow Ukraine to be a member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization.
Yeah.
This, and also the Crimea and the eastern parts of Ukraine, they are areas of interest, for Russia.
Yeah.
Respect this, and we will sit down with you to discuss anything, everything. If that note has been positively received and sent through the normal diplomatic channels, and conversation around that note had taken place, then the likelihood of war, open hostilities breaking out would not have happened. So Russia believes that it has been treated shabbily, peremptorily, disdainfully, imperiously, what have you, that it is now being relegated into a third-class power, virtually. So in order to assert itself and to say, look, when we say red line, we mean red line. This is it. So if the Western Alliance had actually pondered a little and thought about the consequences of pushing the boundaries of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization right up to the borderline of Russia, then I think the outcome would have been
quite different. Yes. All right. So, Professor, I'm going to ask, now, this is an issue now of national pride for Russia. You have taken us for granted, you have taken us lightly, and we need to remind you that we are Russia again. But is there any guise for which one country can invade another country that is not in any hostility, is not hostile towards it physically? I mean, yes, Russia has legitimate concerns it expressed, but Ukraine was not hostile at the moment to Russia, and he moved about 100,000 troops, jets, men, all of that to its border and eventually invaded. Is this justified in any guise, in any form? Historically, culturally, is there any way this is justified?
I think in human affairs, you have what is called potential.
Okay.
And you also have what is reality.
Yeah.
Reality faces you very directly.
Yes, it does.
Okay, and you have to tackle it almost also, directly or momentarily. But potential is also very important to consider, especially in relations between two states.
Yes, sir.
Or in this context, we're talking of the remote, possibility of, superpower, rivalry, of conflict.
Yes.
Good. Therefore, for Putin if I read his mind correctly,
yes.
This was not even, it was beyond potential, conflict.
Yes.
It was a real conflict. Yes. And based on what Ambassador His Excellency has just said, there was a note of caution or an attempt to resolve this thing diplomatically. Why was it not followed? I think that is, for me, the way I look at the issue at the moment is that there's this, element of, Western hypocrisy, and also, an attempt to actually use this to ridicule the Russians or the Russian leadership. And I think any nation worth, its salt will actually try and also say that no, this is not permissible. And for me, considering also the fact that Ukraine was part of the old Soviet bloc, or part of the Soviet Union of Socialist Soviet Socialist republics. It was impossible for them to for Russia to stand by, to detach itself and say, oh, it doesn't really matter. They can expand. He can go and they can go and join NATO, and we will be able at a particular point in time contain them. It is never possible, especially at the point where we are. Globally at the moment.
And true, realistically, wars have been started for less.
Oh, yeah.
They have been started for less.
Yeah.
Professor Ajayi, I'm going to ask you this. Now, the West, NATO, and the US have always held on to the moral high ground. We are in the right, they are in the wrong. But Russia, one of the things Russia stated that NATO and the United States of America invaded, they killed Gaddafi, there was Syria, Libya, Iraq, and all of that. Does the West still have the moral high ground to lecture Russia, to tell Russia what is right or wrong? Or should they be taking a more humble approach and say, we believe we've erred, can we go back to discussion and work this out? Professor Ajayi?
Thank you very much. I believe every nation in the world has the right to secure its territory. And just like my former, professor have said, diplomacy has been used. Putin has actually warned the whole world that he doesn't want Ukraine to join NATO. And he has warned several times to stop all these things. However, he justified his action based on the security of Russia. Historically, if we look at it very well, we realize that he's been entangled. And then the whole world reacted into it. And it's just between anarchy and democracy now, which means that the administration you are focusing this issue on Africa. It's time for Africans to actually end their dependency principles. Let's say that Finnish and Swedes is now backing out to join NATO. And we know NATO was established in Washington, D.C. in the US here. And Putin has actually warned that Ukraine should not join NATO. No, NATO is just an agreement for anything in terms of security for all the Western areas, including US. And let us realize that in Africa, Russia never invaded Africa. Russia did not participate in Berlin Conference, where they partitioned and shared Africa countries. Russia never colonized any country in Africa. Russia never owned any slaves or owned any slave market. And Russia never allowed all the leaders in Africa to hide their stolen goods or anything from Africa that time. And Russia never invaded Africa. Russia never colonized any part in Africa or destabilized Africa. So we have to look at Russia as one of the superpowers in the past, and again, even still superpower now. You know, they have to be very careful in terms of whom they actually support or whom they do not support. But I believe that the whole world, things have changed in the world, and Russia should actually be very, 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 very decent in terms of invasion of any country in the world. Okay. And I think Africans should be able to actually get up and be independent
on their own.
And again, focused on each country, Africa, have potentials.
Okay.
And try to be on its own.
All right. Thank you.
That's my own.
Thank you, Professor Ajayi. Wow. He mentioned something very important, that Africa must stop its dependency on the West and form its own cause and chart its own cause. It seems like, Ambassador, this is again another international politics matter. It seems that the tectonic plates of international politics seem to be shifting. In the last UN meeting, Nigeria supported the UN, condemning Russia about its invasion. But what does this mean, this Russian-Ukraine war? What does this mean for Africa, Nigeria, African countries in terms of politics, military, economics? Let's bring it home. What does this mean for us?
Yeah, well, Professor Ajayi has already hinted at what it means for us. It means that we have to wake up to realize what is our position vis-a-vis the rest of the world. Yeah. Number one, we have to realize that this war and Russia's asserting of itself, its power, means the end of the Eurocentric world order as we know it, which has evolved from 1945 and actually re-emerged in 1981 with the collapse of the former Soviet Union. Yeah. So Africans should realize that the world is no longer a Eurocentric bloc whereby only European values and views matter more than any other. Yeah. We in Africa should now identify our own values. Okay. Even democracy, is it a potted plant democracy that you just pick from one country and bring to the other and that is it? Or does it have cultural peculiarities, historical idiosyncrasies, and even national identities that you can really make it your own? Governance, what does it mean? We have to now perfect our system of governance and our interrelationships in Africa. When we get this cohesiveness in Africa around the values of the African Union, then we can present a united front to the world. So with the dissolution of the Western hegemony now, which is happening today, right now as we are speaking, Africa should go to the United Nations to demand a new international order. And this new international order should be based on economic equality, economic equity, rather, and also rules-based system of engagement between and among nations. And the bottom line we should demand in the United Nations is that unequivocally we must be part of the power structure in the United Nations. We must be in the United Nations Security Council as a permanent member with voting and veto rights. This is the bottom line. Immediately we should demand this and insist on it. Otherwise, we disengage, come home to Africa, look inwards, and build the African Union as an alternative political and diplomatic bloc to any other bloc that is existing. And the second takeaway from this war is that immediately the African Union should convene and revitalize the non-nuclear zone in Africa. That's the nuclear weapons-free zone. Yeah. We assert it and demand the Western powers, the four Western powers that have nuclear weapons, to respect it in writing, in form of a treaty and deposited with the United Nations. Any country that has nuclear weapons must give a written commitment unequivocal binding commitment that they will not use nuclear weapons in Africa or against Africans. This is the bottom line. This is absolutely critical. We have to insist on that. Then we have to now commit ourselves to the Agenda 2063 of the African Union to develop our infrastructure, to unite Africa, to break down barriers, economic barriers, political barriers, customs barriers, and actualize the Africa Continental Free Trade Arrangement so that we become fused together as one entity, as one economy. And around that, build up political and military and security structures. Because you have seen the position of the black person in Ukraine. We don't matter.
We don't.
And if Nigeria and South Africa and other countries don't wake up to establish, to assert the dignity of the black person, nobody will do that for us. We have to do that.
Thank you. Professor Nuhu, I'm going to ask you the same question. What does this mean for us as Africans, economically, militarily, politically? What does this mean for us? What are the opportunities, the downsides, the upsides? What does this mean for us?
Well, I guess His Excellency, the Ambassador, has really spelled out everything. Other than to add the footnote to what he has said, it's quite critical that the poignant points he has made, particularly to declare that Africa is a nuclear-free zone, has to be embedded in whatever is the agreement or protocol we are taking to the United Nations, and this should be respected. Of course, the other thing is that just 2019, there was this Sochi, conference that Putin, invited African states, and about 43 African states actually attended, and the whole idea was that, Russia would want to see to what extent it can leverage its relationship, diplomatic relationship with African states to such an extent that Africa could be assisted. As we have also noted historically, and as Professor Ajayi has also said, Russia has never had any colony in Africa. Indeed, the role Russia has played from 1960, especially when most African states became independent, to date, was to see to what extent they could come in and assist. I also remembered, some of us when we were in the university, some of our colleagues were also sponsors, to go and receive, to go for their higher degrees in the Soviet Union as of that time. So there was this cultural, educational, and military, support that Russia, the defunct Soviet Union provided, to actually enable, Africans to be on their own. And of course, it culminated in the famous, extraordinary summit meeting of 1976, in which said went and declared that Africa had come of age, and we're not going to prepare. We're not prepared to be tossed around as you were here any longer. So those are the ingredients, we could derive from past experience. Relationship we have had, the Soviet Union, and really make sure that a turning point has come, really, with this Russia and Ukrainian conflict. We cannot be a pawn in the geopolitical conflicts, superpower conflicts between America and and Russia as it is now. So we should also, just as an ambassador has said, let's get a uniform position from Africa. Let that be. In fact, as this thing is happening, I thought that the African Union will even meet extraordinary meeting, because it's very crucial. We have kids who, we have seen also the experience in these past few days, how they are suffering. In fact, the black man actually doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter
in global affairs at all. So this is the time for us for a decision making. That is so crucial for our own survival.
All right, so the black man really doesn't matter international affairs.
We don't.
It's the truth. So we'll continue this conversation, but before that, let's just take a little clip that will push this conversation a little further.
After Russia's invasion began on Thursday, February 24th, 2022, the African Union has reacted by expressing extreme concern at the very serious and dangerous situation created in Ukraine. While the South African government called on Russia to withdraw from attack, the Kenyan ambassador to the United Nations warns that clinging to the legacies of colonialism risk new forms of domination and oppression. Reports say thousands of African students are trapped in the country. 4,000 Nigerian students are currently studying in Ukraine, along with 8,000 from Morocco and 3,500 from Egypt. There are South African students in the city of Kharkiv. They are all desperate to leave, but flights are grounded and other options are limited. Following reports of maltreatment and racial profiling of Africans in war-ravaged Ukraine, governments have begun to evacuate their nationals. Most of the evacuees are medical students hoping to finish studies. Meanwhile, the Nigerian government has commenced evacuation of its citizens. The first batch of 415 Nigerians based in Ukraine arrived in Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport, Abuja, Friday. Nigeria's foreign ministry says it has been reassured by the Nigerian embassy in Ukraine of the safety of other Nigerians in the country, and measures have been taken to keep them safe. Zimbabwe says it has evacuated 118 students from Ukraine to Romania, Hungary, Slovakia, and Poland. Some 79 Kenyan students have left Ukraine following Russia's invasion and have sought refuge in neighboring countries like Poland, Romania, and Hungary. However, President Uhuru Kenyatta's government says it is coordinating the evacuation of many other students from various cities in Ukraine. Tanzania's foreign ministry, on the other hand, says that 38 students in Ukraine had crossed into neighboring Poland, and officials at Tanzania's embassies in Germany and Sweden were overseeing the repatriation of all Tanzanians still stranded inside Ukraine. In the meantime, the United Nations General Assembly voting on Russia-Ukraine ceasefire revealed significant differences among African countries at the body. 17 countries from the continent abstained, 27 countries voted for the resolution, and one, Eritrea, voted against it.
We welcome the offer of good offices made by the Secretary General and reiterate the call by the African Union to establish an immediate ceasefire and to open political negotiations without delay under the auspices of the United Nations in order to preserve the world from the consequences of planetary conflict.
Now it's time for us to make ours. The United States is choosing to stand with the Ukrainian people. We are choosing, in coordination with our allies and partners, to impose severe consequences on Russia.
The vote at the Assembly's first emergency session since 1997 was 141 to 5, with 35 abstentions. Most Western nations voted against Russia and were joined by Nigeria and Kenya, along with 25 other countries on the continent. South Africa's decision to abstain has been criticized inside the country. In the BRICS alliance, of which South Africa is a member, China and India also abstained, while Brazil supported the resolution. Ethiopia was among the African countries that were not present, but Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has issued a statement calling on all parties to exercise restraint in the crisis.
Welcome back. So we will be pursuing the conversation forward. Professor Ajayi, I would like to ask, we've just seen that this conflict has shown us that the black man, the African, doesn't really matter. When Germany was going to impose some sanctions on Russia, she talked about Russia's economic power in terms of oil and gas and how they're dependent on Russia, and there was a bit of a holdback. Same way militarily, everyone is being careful because of the economic strength and the military strength of Russia, but it is not the same for Africa. We still live in a bubble. When there's a crisis in Africa, we don't see thousands of European students or thousands of American students being evacuated back to their country. It's always the other way around. How can we use this moment to start a momentum? How can we leverage on this to start a momentum to begin the rebirth of Africa and the push towards an Africa that is worthy of its history?
I like your analysis. And Africa has no relevance in anything around the world. In as much as you have so much potentials in each of the nations to make it relevant. It is about time that we have all the African leaders to come together and make Africa very relevant. I mentioned that we borrow from all the East or the West or stuff like that to actually design what we have. Africa also have its own, which we are not actually sharing with the whole world. Possibly we will come with a AGC that is autocratic democracy in terms of forming our own line of principles. That is auto-democracy. Since we always love to go. However, African nations have so much. Go to any part of the world where you find all these Africans, their relevance into the system where they stay, where they live. Why can't you come home and sit together and again design what we should have? Look at Ukraine, for instance. We have so many Africans going there to study medicine, to study engineering. Why can't we do something like that? We have so much in Africa that you can actually transfer or export to that part of the world. It's about time the African leaders come together and actually get together and ensure that what we naturally have, is actually transferred to other places. Then we can make ourselves very relevant. It all depends on the leaders. And when we are appointing leaders or electing leaders, we have to think of their mental capacity of doing that. We have them in Africa, not only in Nigeria, all across. So let us harvest their brain so that they could be relevant in other parts of the world. The mental capabilities of every leaders in Africa are enough to actually showcase for the Western or the Eastern to borrow from us. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, permit me to be partial. So I'm going to come back to Professor. Professor, like you said, and we've been discussing, one of the main one of the things that take a lot of African out to other countries is education. We have universities all over the place. There were times in Nigerian history, to be specific, when private schools were considered the place for non-intelligent people who couldn't do well. But it's not the case anymore. What can we do to get in? If we just fix our education, there are a lot of countries who will come to Nigeria for education. What can we do? You've been in the system for decades, more than 40 years. What can we do to move forward in that area using this as a springboard?
Well, I guess, excuse me, I guess that everybody, particularly at the political class level,
yes,
is aware of the importance of education.
Yes.
I'm not going to, of course, I've been in the classroom for over 50 years,
yes,
until I retired recently. And if we are to address, the problem of the black man. In fact, some people have even said, and I think it's the wise saying of Mandela, he said, Africa can only be relevant if Nigeria is relevant.
Wow, yeah.
He said it. And it is, it summarized everything about, what is the leadership role of this country. And we cannot actually assume that leadership role if we decide not to put emphasis on education. And it pains me also that, because of the negligent, negligent way we have handled education, ASU is on strike at the moment. Oh. This is something that, is not, imaginable.
Yeah.
I didn't expect that, at this point in time, we will be having this kind of about education funding. So what is critical, therefore, is that adequate funding should be be given to education, and will also ensure that there is, the educational sector is reorganized.
We're not dependent as we are right now on foreign education. Internationally, we have a stake, we have a voice, we can do something.
There's no way we'll escape that, as long as we have also neglected, the education sector.
Consequences. So, Ambassador, I'm going to ask you this: how does this likely end? How does this likely end?
Well, like all conflicts, like all situations, it will end in negotiations, whether they like it or not. And both sides will feel the pain, morally, physically, intellectually, psychologically, temperamentally, in whatever. But they will have to come to the negotiation table. All wars in history ended with declaration of victory and also declaration of secession. So it has to be like that. But the way I look at it today is that we have reached really, we have pushed the boundaries to extremes.
Yeah.
So there is no points of convergence between NATO and Russia today. So, but the only person that I can see who could play a role is the French President Macron.
Okay.
He has very cleverly kept his lines of communication open with President Putin. He has not gone to the extreme of the NATO leaders and the EU leaders who have vitriolically come out to be attacking Putin. He played the statesman-like. So I think of all Western leaders, he is the one who could now play the bridge builder and bring this crisis to an end. That is one. Secondly, Putin has stated that he has to reach certain targets, certain goals, strategic goals, which means in security parlance, the conquest of Ukraine, really.
Yeah.
But that could be prevented if immediately the leadership in Ukraine says, we will not join NATO. And I think that will change the dynamics even on the ground. And he will just put a stop, I think, to the war and say, okay, come to the negotiation table, let us talk, put this in writing and sign it. And I think that is the way it will go. But for Africa, it's very important, as Professor Ajayi said and my professor reiterated, and Professor began his intervention about reality and potentials. In foreign policy, you have to put these things together. They have to go pari passu. The reality today is that the entire world, particularly a certain part of the world, views the rest of the world along racial lines.
Yeah.
You cannot escape that. The reaction to the Ukrainian conflict is fundamentally different on their side to the reaction with Israeli attacks on Palestine, of American attacks on Iraq, of American attacks on Afghanistan. They are quite different. Even emotionally, when they report the others, they are emotionally detached, very clinical, to the point of being robotic, actually. But in this one, their emotions is very involved.
All right.
So we have to now really design our policies and projects around the dignity of the Black person.
Professor, thank you very much. Professor Ajayi, in just 30 seconds, your final thoughts, how this ends, in about 30 seconds.
Well, war is not good for anybody. We all want peace. And then war is where you have the young people killing themselves, whereas the decision was made by the old people who don't kill themselves. So we should actually come to the point of actually accommodating each other. Putin has warned about this, and then working with the place. And the system over there.
War, like you said,
them to
like
be
you said, war
like
is not the best outcome. As someone said, war is young people dying and old people talking. Unfortunately, we're out of time, and with this episode of Lensonafrica, would unfortunately have to end at this note. It's been wonderful having all of you, and we hope that we will continue this conversation in other episodes. This is Lensonafrica. See you same time next week.